Okay, welcome everybody to the February 21st, 2011 budget review or workshop. First up is budget review.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Or do we have council questions?
We have council questions. I'll feel like I'll do those.
Questions, and we'll go to budget review.
Mayor Pro Tem and council members, you had just a few questions from your last workshop. The first one had to do with the automated field reporting system. The question had to do about what the ongoing operating costs for the system. The short answer is about $20,000 a year in additional cost in the way of maintenance and operating would be necessary to take care of the system. There are some benefits on the other side. There's less paper use, and the personnel that are currently doing the system would be available for other duty. So there are some benefits that come out of it. Question number 2, how do we hold the single source vendor competitively responsible monetarily and for performance? These are difficult situations, particularly when you're dealing with products or purchases that involve high-tech equipment or something of that nature, where you purchase a particular vendor to start a system, and then as there are changes or amendments to that particular system, you're often relegated to using the same vendor. So that does impede upon the normal competitive bidding process. We do try to work with that as best we can, and to, in those situations, research out other cities or other situations to make sure that pricing is as competitive as we can make it. We are very sensitive to the issue that you raise about this, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that we have as competitive an environment for bidding as we possibly can. But there are some situations increasingly, particularly in the area of technology or other specialized areas, where getting to a perfectly competitive arrangement is challenging at times. In-car video systems, what are the fail-safe measures or policy procedure considerations for the in-car video system, and how do we ensure that officers are diligent about proper usage for future evidence? Well, the first thing to know is that the officers do receive extensive training on the policies regarding this, and how to use it, and when to use it, and when not. But it's important to note that the system itself does not allow the officer to modify, erase, or add to a video or audio reporting. So that's an important measure. Also, I think this was noted at the workshop, anytime the emergency lights are activated, the system is responding, so it comes on automatically. And also the camera is always recording, and a copy of the recording data can be made for up to 18 to 20 hours. So that's an important feature as well. The last question was on operating the capital budget. What are the alternatives or solutions if the state makes changes to taxation on commercial property? That's probably, in a lot of respects, one of the most important questions we have right now. Alan and I were just talking about it a bit. There are many cities that have a variety of alternative funding sources. We here in Des Moines don't have very many alternative funding sources as it relates to our general fund. We are heavily reliant upon the property tax, and with the changes that the governor is proposing, and hopefully the legislature modifies to some extent, it would put additional stresses on that particular issue, and would really encourage us to look for other ways to fund our local government with other forms of revenue. So that is a discussion we hope to continue to have with you, and Mayor Pro Tem and members. We hope to come back to you, hopefully in the near future, with some ideas on how to approach that particular issue. And I'll have a little bit more to say about that later on in the workshop in terms of property taxes and some of the commercial valuation data that we've just received. So, but I'll wait for that, Mayor Pro Tem, until later in the workshop. With that, that is the response to questions.
Okay, moving on to enterprise budget presentation.
Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council, Alan McKinley, Deputy City Manager. Today is our anticipated to be our final budget presentation to you, and in addition to it being a review of the enterprise operations, which is primarily the last large segment of the budget that we have not touched on thus far. There's also just an overall summary of the budget, and the budget documents you should have in front of you. The companion document to the capital budget, which is the more detailed project-by-project listing within the capital improvements budget, and the 5-year program. that's also included in that document. Just to give you a perspective, the proposed or recommended FY12 budget is almost $609 million. We've broken that down into the capital improvements budget of about $131 million, and then the operating budget for a total of about $478 million. So about 22% of our total budget is related to capital improvements, both in the enterprise side and the GO bond portion of the CIP. This gives you a perspective of the overall budget by fund. You'll see at the bottom the general fund of about $142 million, 23% of our overall budget. This is commonly referred to as kind of the bread and butter. It's the police and fire, library, parks and recreation, a lot of general administration portions of budgets are there as well. But you can see all the enterprise funds moving on the left side, all the way to the top at aviation. Our debt service fund, which is also primarily, probably 99% property tax funded, over there on the right side, listed at $45 million. Just as a summary again for you, the capital improvements program that we've gone through for the 2 or 3 meetings here and provided you some highlights is provided here to you by category. Obviously, streets is the largest section at 26%. The municipal building improvements is rather large. This phase related to the Municipal Service Center project that's just starting up. Large expenses in fire as it relates to the training and logistics facility, maintenance facility, and the Station 1 renovation, or excuse me, replacement, and then of course the airport improvements. Just kind of as a review for you of some of the issues and challenges that we've been facing and that you have probably heard about even as recently as this past week or weekend. We do have American with Disabilities Act settlement that's we've estimated at $8.1 million. That's an estimate at this point, depending on what happens for bids. We've just provided a range there. We have a sanitary sewer decree that's originally talked about $250 million. We've made headway in that. Over time, we have what estimated to be about $150 million to go. We've talked about the impact of Chapter 411 over the next 3 to 5 years. Most recently, a commercial rollback proposal proposed by the governor and being considered by the legislature. That has up to a $28 to $30 million impact, or affects $28 to $30 million of property taxes. We've talked about potential CDBG losses now. We've had discussions about flood protection. On the economic side, commercial and residential valuation decline has been in the news recently for our downtown area, and actually it's metro-wide has seen a decline. In a few minutes we're going to talk about parking system revenues. They are an enterprise operation along with the airport that seems to be most tied to economic activity and market activity as opposed to, say, our solid waste operation. Sewer revenues, the weather conditions has impacted some of our revenues. We want to talk about that. And then most recently we just are seeing across the country, obviously not here in Des Moines, but across the country, cities that are looking at potential bankruptcies that we've not seen before. Those are going to could have some impact on bond rates in general. The default rate for bonds have been extremely low for municipalities for 30, 40 years as compared to private debt, but it's going to be could be slightly higher as it relates to bankruptcies happening with some of the cities across the country. You may have heard discussions about state bankruptcies. That's a completely different process. Has to do with U.S. Constitution and capabilities of states even claiming bankruptcies. That will be an interesting environment to see how that proceeds.
Alan, before you go on under the economic one, just to highlight one of the particular things on here, they're all important and have huge impact, all the points listed here. But the first one under economic, commercial, and residential valuations, $3.5 million, just to put this in context, you might remember the story in the Register. They did a great job a couple weeks ago about talking about valuation declines on the commercial side. Because of the vacancy rates downtown, we're looking at some of the properties, many of the properties reducing value by as much as 28%, and that factor has been applied to virtually all of the office buildings downtown. So it's a rather dramatic reduction, and when you do the math, of course, there's commercial valuation reductions across the city, and when you do the math, you're looking at valuation drops for the city as a whole of around $220 million in commercial values lost. That's then what allows the calculation of $3.5 million. The $3.5 million is loss of actual tax revenues. So when I'm talking about values there, that's $3.5 million of ongoing tax revenues, and of course you don't get that back until those values go the other direction. So some of us are optimistic that in time those buildings will fill up again. I think they will. But for right now and the foreseeable future, we are encountering rather dramatic reductions. Those reductions, by the way, don't hit us until the FY13 budget. So a year from now, you'll be struggling with budgets unless something else happens. You'll be looking at these losses and trying to figure out how to manage around that. For the budget you're about to approve, these reductions aren't there. But as you know, we do look at forecasting. We try to project ahead. So once we're done with this budget, we're going to have to be very diligent at looking at how we're going to manage that particular reduction. And of course, if the governor's proposal or other legislative actions come on board that reduce revenues further, that will make the hill steeper to climb. So we are facing a set of facts right now which is going to be daunting for us and for you as we look at the next few years. So fasten your seatbelt.
We may ask, how are we compared, at least as far as office vacancies, compared to other cities in the Midwest. Terry Vorbrick from our Office of Economic Development recently provided us some information about Class A, B, and C vacancy rates in many Midwestern cities. And really, I think the takeaway that we got from that was that we are faring fairly well compared to most of the other cities in the Midwest. Actually, I think in particular they're looking at comparison with Omaha, and they had included some anticipated relocations to new office space, some large corporate headquarter type movement that will cause their vacancy rates to increase even higher once that happens.
Alan, I should have mentioned that if you take three of the issues listed here, the Chapter 411 cost increases, the reduction in commercial values, and the commercial rollback proposal, and you try to aggregate those, connect all those together, and figure out what the impact is. We've done a little bit of work there. In the first year of the budget, now this would be FY13, you'd be looking at a $9 million reduction in revenues. By year 5, that number increases to about $43 million. Now that's by virtue of the fact that the rollback proposal that's on the table in the legislature or being discussed is incrementally increased at increments of about 8% valuation reduction each year for 5 years. That's a proposal. Presumably that will be modified as it goes through the process. I hope that happens, but right now that's what's on the table. Those numbers do aggregate to these rather staggering amounts. Again, $9 million in year 1 growing to $43 million. And even if the legislative proposal doesn't happen, these other trends are likely to happen to some extent. So again, we've got some huge issues in front of us because of these actions. So we'll be reporting on all this and trying to look for solutions. We want to stay ahead of the game. We will produce balanced budgets, but it's going to be challenging.
This is Chris. I think one of the other important things to have you and Alan talk about would be the information you provided to us on the M&E tax and the fact that one of the proposals is that there would be some backfill by the legislature. But if Alan could just recap, sent to us on the M&E and how that's not really occurred.
Yeah, to put that in a little context, thank you, Mrs. Hensley. The proposal from the governor's office on commercial rollback has usually included discussion about the fact that some of those lost revenues would be backfilled by state action. It's not clear to me at this point exactly how that would occur, but the proposal is that there will be some backfill. When you look at history and actions that have been taken in the past, what you see is that there hasn't been a wonderful record in terms of either providing those backfills or in sustaining other revenues that would make up for those losses. And Christine is making reference to the M&E machinery and equipment tax that was eliminated some years ago. I'm going to ask Alan. He's done some great research to see how that's actually impacted us over the years.
So I think there's two issues at hand that Rick's already touched on. One is the concept of there being some sort of, at least in the past, economic development that will occur that will more than offset the loss of revenues from a particular reduction that was made. And then also then the backfilling as a temporary bridge before that economic development is realized. Over the years, we've had 25, 30 years ago, we had a personal property tax that was in place statewide. That program was eliminated. The state stepped in and provided a personal property replacement program that lasted for a few years, and then as the state was faced with budget constraints, they started to whittle away at that replacement amount, and finally it was eliminated completely in the late 1990s or early 2000s. The machinery and equipment example, they had provided the state had provided a 5-year replacement program that lasted, I think in the original plan, I think it lasted at least 3 years. It may have been cut off a year or two early or again whittled down. The issue there was, though, that as the elimination of machinery and equipment were to happen in the industrial properties, that there would be this blossoming of industrial development occurring statewide that would cause the loss of the M&E to be overshadowed by the increase in industrial value. In reality, for Des Moines, I think we lost somewhere around $5.5 million of tax revenue that was coming in from the machinery and equipment portion of the property tax. That was in the mid-1990s. Today, our industrial values 15 years later has generated an extra $2.5 million. So we're behind by $3 million, I think, about after around 15 years of economic development blossoming in the industrial classifications. So we are about $9 million behind in those different areas. Personal property, there was a population allocation, there was a bank franchise tax, there was the M&E valuation losses that in total is about $9 million a year that we're not recognizing in revenues. The next slide is some more a listing of some of the challenges and opportunities. We're looking at a municipal service center, potential for some employee and equipment cost reductions, opportunities for governmental collaboration with state government and other local government entities. We have received some significant funding from federal and state funds as it relates to our storm and sanitary capital project program. We've had opportunity to do realize about $13 million in debt service savings due to refinancings. I stood here a month or so ago and said I think we're probably done doing that, but I think there's probably a few more opportunities in our sanitary sewer fund in particular, and as those opportunities happen, we will certainly, or as they present themselves, we'll certainly try to take advantage of that. Southeast Connector, again, is another opportunity for economic development as it moves eastward. This is just a couple of quotes from Center for State and Local Government Excellence. I'm not going to read them, and from the National League of Cities, but the gist of it is that there are cities across the country that are facing similar situations as Des Moines, and a lot of them are facing far worse than we are. And it is generally considered some of the most bleakest of situations in the 25-year history, for example, of the National League of Cities annual City Fiscal Condition Survey. So this is something that's being experienced and endured by cities, counties, school districts, all of local governments and state governments as well across the country. We wanted to touch base with you on the enterprise operations. The first one we just wanted to touch base with for you is the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund. We just provided you a summary there of the beginning balance and the ending balance. It's healthy, about $11 million budget, and 20% of it is related to landfill fees, and about 44% is related to employee costs. And the remaining large one is equipment, obviously, for fuel and maintenance and operations of our fleet. There's no rate change in the near term in our projections. We have a very steady revenue stream, and there is a continued focus on efforts to reduce costs. We've been successful, Public Works has, as it relates to automation. And we've also seen an increase in compost revenue and recycling revenue. In particular, we've provided some convenience opportunities for our customers with the big blue toter bins as opposed to the smaller green bins that we implemented that a few years ago. This is just a reflection of the full-time employee count in the solid waste fund. You can see in 1999 we were at 93 employees. We're down to 50, and you can see some of the drops. There are some descriptions there, again, related to technology introduction into the collection system. This is a great slide to see what happens when you're able to introduce technology. This is just a listing of the recycling tons collected by fiscal year, and to just show you the history from 2006 to 2010, from 6,600 tons now to 9,800 tons for 2010. We wanted to move to the parking system review. As you can see at the top, the ending fund balance is not nearly as robust as we saw in the solid waste fund. And as I said earlier, this is an operation that is much more economically sensitive to the market and the economy. In particular, the vacancy rate downtown. There are less people downtown parking, going to work each day, and so it's had an impact on our revenue stream. We wanted to touch base, first of all, just to show you our about a $9.4 million appropriations for the parking system. 23% is over there on garage operations. That's we've contracted out with a private operator to run our garages on a daily basis. And our debt payments at 29% does anticipate a deferral and a payment of principal that we are working with on EMC on our lease payment. They haven't gotten back to us, but their initial response was very positive in pursuing something of that nature.
Do you see that becoming a net positive in the next couple of years, or is it going to stay?
This one is really dependent on what's happening downtown as far as vacancy rates in the downtown. It's just it's contingent upon the workforce and the number that we have downtown. We've had some of the larger entities have built private garages for their employees to park in, and so there's been a shifting of parkers from our system to private garages.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of why I ask, because I think this problem's going to stay where it's at, if not get worse, over the next couple of years.
Mr. Grease, I think you make a very good point. The parking system is very market-driven, and it's pretty obvious with all the vacancies that demand for parking has gone down. And the other underlying trends, as Alan has noted, is we've had a lot of private parking constructed dedicated to a particular use. The best recent example being Wellmark, and they pulled out of the system. But if there's any positive thing about it, it is that with all the vacant space, as that space reoccupies, they are going to need some place to park, and we have a parking system that's available. So that is a good thing. But for the short term, there's going to be some stresses on the system, and there is not a perfect answer for this. We've looked at a whole variety of things. One of the things we talked about at some length was selling the system. That's a suggestion that's often come from this table about ways to remedy the situation. But that even comes with some pretty significant hurdles, because you'd have to pay off the outstanding debt. You would see parking rates increase dramatically. That would then put negative pressure on the reoccupancy of the buildings downtown. So there's no easy answers to it. But your comment, I think, suggests that we monitor this very, very carefully, and we are going to have to look for ways, some creative ways to manage through the situation we're in right now.
Rick, this is Chris. On the parking system, the garage up by Vets Auditorium, the park and ride, with that being, you and I have discussed this, it's almost empty now because of shifts and changes.
Right.
Can we explore looking at that garage and tying it in with the event center, since parking is such an issue up there, potentially leasing it to the county?
That would be a great idea, and so we are going to pursue that. There had been some discussion about, well, what would happen if you connect that garage by Skywalk? Would that make it more accessible, more attractive for the county? So that's certainly something that ought to be looked at. The other one is that it may be, we'll see how things shake out in the short term, but it may be that as some of your older garages come up for reconstruction, you'll have a decision point which says, should we rebuild that garage or should we just remove the parking supply from the system? If there's too much supply, then you deal with it by reducing supply. So that's something we'll have to look at as well. All options are going to be on the table. We have to maintain the viability of the system. You have outstanding bonds on it, so with that situation, we've got to make sure that the system is financially solvent. So we will do that, but it's going to be a challenge.
Do you know what that number is, the outstanding bonds, ballpark, off the top of your head?
We'll get it
You can get back
for
to
you.
it.
It's in the multi-million-dollar range, but
The lack of revenues there, that could affect DART too, our support of DART, couldn't it, Rick?
it could. The park and ride system, the garage that Christine referred to, is the garage that generates the revenues for DART and for other things. It's got a transit tag to it. And Mr. Mahaffey, as you know, we do still have a long-term contract with Principal, where they occupy about half of that facility, if I recall, and they pay a lease fee for that. So there is sort of a bottom sustaining revenue that comes off that garage, even though it looks like there's a lot of vacancy. There is a lot of vacancy. There is still a pretty significant revenue by virtue of the fact that Principal leases about half of that facility.
And we do, by federal regulation, we do segregate the park and ride from the rest of the parking system, because there are some constraints since federal dollars were used for the construction of that facility. Our parking revenue is really divided into two basic types of revenue. We have the monthly parking revenue. The decrease was greater than we expected about a year ago, a downturn of a little over 1,000 parkers since January of 2009. The other part is our transit parking revenue, so it's day-to-day parking revenue and parkers. It was very strong in December of 2007 through April of 2008, but has been declining since 2008. At a less decline than our monthly parkers. And then, of course, our transit parking is also bolstered by special events, conventions, and I guess daily parkers. We're hoping for a rebound in the second half of 2011 and then starting back in 2012. I think the important part to understand is that we are able to meet our bond coverage requirements. So we have enough revenue coming in that as it relates net operations, as it relates to our debt payments. It's just that the amount of net revenue we have available after we pay for capital projects and other operating costs that are not part of the coverage calculation, there isn't much left over at the end of the year of what we're being projected at this time. These are some of the vacancies that have happened or are planned to or expected to happen. We have Wellmark, 1,000 spaces that will be effective April 1st, 2011. We list there the parking garages that will be impacted by that. July of 2010, last July, 300 spaces as it relates to Aviva. The Davis Brown Tower, there were 140 spaces or paid spaces that were left the system. A number of other smaller customers. We have lots of office space downtown that can be made up of offices that have 30, 40, 50 people in them. So you can't really just only think about the companies that have 500 or 1,000 employees. There are lots of office space that previously may have had a smaller employee count, and lots of those offices are no longer in the downtown. There's been some reduced events at the convention complex at 5th and Grand. The Keogh parking garage is the primary parking facility there. With reduced events there, our revenues are down in that area as well. This is just a bar chart showing you the parking garage revenue. You can see that in 2008 we hit our peak at $8.1 million. 6, 7, and 8 I think are reflections of rate increases also going into effect. 2009 was actually the last rate increase. The last few were split 6 months apart. But from 2009 you can see the decline, and we're anticipating hopefully 2012 will be at $6.6 million of annual revenue, so $1.5 million annual revenue drop in our parking garage operations. That's significant. What are our next steps? We are continuing to try to control expenses as much as possible. We're meeting with our private garage operators on opportunities for latest and greatest on automation and any other cost reduction operations. We will look at refinancing of debt. We refinanced one portion of our debt last year and a half ago with some savings. We will look at that again. We recommend keeping the rates at their current levels. The issue is not really pricing, but it's our vacancy rate and the fact that we just have a lot of vacant office space downtown. Again, the increase in revenues is dependent on our economy and what's happening in the downtown. We're going to try to provide fast response to requests from potential customers, be as flexible as we can to meet needs, and try to grow the system back to where it was to the 2008 levels, but it's going to take time.
Alan and Rick, can we have some discussion about, I know our rates are, that parking's always an issue as companies are looking at whether they locate or relocate in the downtown area. With the parking system being so low right now with occupancy, can we look at maybe increasing it by lowering the rates and maybe more people parking there?
Chris, that's a great idea, and we've given a lot of consideration to what would happen if we lowered rates. Here's the thing you confront: if you lower rates, our concern is that you would simply lower overall revenues. If we thought we could lower rates and increase enough customers to offset the lower rate factor, it would make sense to do. But we're not sure that's what would happen. Our fear is that if we lowered rates pervasively, other than through some sort of an economic development tactic, that the impact on revenues would not be positive. And economists would say that the demand for parking is relatively inelastic. That is, it's not very responsive to price changes. And that's pretty much been the case downtown, that we haven't seen real significant reductions in revenues when we've increased prices. So it's a thought. We're going to have to monitor that pricing issue very carefully. But if we start making overall changes in the system, our concern is that revenues would be adversely impacted. Now, all of that said, on the economic development side, we have done some projects where if somebody's adding a lot of employees or there's an economic development factor to it, we have sometimes made, as part of the economic development package, we've underwritten the cost of parking. That's an economic development cost, not a parking system cost in that situation. But from the business standpoint, they view that as a reduction in parking costs. So some of those kind of techniques are out there, and we do look at those and have used them from time to time when there's a job creation or tax base issue involved. Alan, anything you can add to it?
I think you pretty much covered it.
But it's evident that the businesses that are building their own feel it's more advantageous to them than to continue to support our parking garages. So there's some cost balances there that need to be worked on.
That is correct. There are also some provisions when some of the private garages were constructed as part of economic development projects, Wellmark, Allied, Wells Fargo all come to mind. There were some stipulations in those contracts, if I remember, that said that the business couldn't really undercut our garages. So hopefully the pricing in those, and we'll have to go back and check that to make sure that's the case, but that would have a pretty negative effect on our system if they were to arbitrarily start putting their parking on the market and at a price much lower than ours. So we have to watch that, and there were some contract provisions that attempted to protect against that.
Just another quick point on that. A lot of times those really large insurance companies, the garages they build are much larger than any we have. Our largest garage is about 1,000 spaces, and we have quite a bit of the parking committed to some other people in those garages. And like Nationwide, they built, an over 2,000 space garage, and they built a second garage that's close to that. Wellmark's garages, they provide about 2,000 parking spaces. So those really large companies, we just don't have parking facilities of the size that would meet their needs. So that's a big part of why they've built their own.
But it must be cost effective for them, or they wouldn't have went ahead and invested into those.
I think for a lot of the private businesses, the parking was a employee attraction issue.
Absolutely.
They wanted to have the parking right outside their door, and if you think about the ones that we have, that's essentially what they have. Case of Allied, I'm looking at Allied, you can get on the skywalk right out their building and you're into their parking garage. So it's very close and accessible, and I think they viewed it as a way to attract and keep employees. It wasn't really a business decision.
And our supply wasn't really in the western gateway as much.
Right.
So the supply wasn't there either.
So, it is safe to say that the number of employees downtown has increased rather dramatically over the years. It is a very strong employment base, and the parking is necessary. It's sort of regrettable. You wish people would take the bus or something like that, and there has been some increase in bus ridership, but the parking has increased generally as a result of the fact that there's been a fairly significant increase in employment downtown. But right now we're at a situation where the vacancies and maybe a slight drop in employment is putting our parking system in a little bit of jeopardy.
The Finance Department reports to me, Hallie, that the current outstanding debt's about $27.4 million. I wanted to move on to the Stormwater Enterprise Fund. Actually, in September, we had quite a bit of discussion with you and some PowerPoint presentations leading up to a new money stormwater revenue bond sale that also incorporated a refinancing as well. You can see there our fund balance is healthy at about $2.5 million projected ending balance. It's about an $18.5 million budget for the stormwater. You can see the different areas again. About 33%, $6 million is related to employee costs, $4 million in debt payments. We anticipate issuing additional debt in the coming 3 to 5 years, and a significant nearly $3 million transfer to the CIP for some pay-as-you-go financing, and we kind of work our way through that when we approach each debt payment on the ratio of what we want to do for pay-as-you-go financing as opposed to debt financing. We would prefer to do pay-as-you-go financing, but our capital demands are so high that we have to pursue long-term debt financing to accomplish much of the capital improvements program. Just as a reminder, in December, the Council did adopt rate increases that are effective January 1st, 2012 and January 1st, 2013. There was not a skip. January 1st, 2011, there was a rate increase that was approved previously by Council a few years ago. So this is continuing the rate increases for 12 and 13 of 4%. It could likely be higher than 4% going beyond 2013, just kind of as a heads up. We have a significant capital improvements program budget. We still are working on final reimbursements from FEMA for 2008 and 2010. So the city's final city's share is still yet to be determined. And then obviously there has been quite a bit of discussion in the past month related to flood risk assessment, and that will also directly impact our future stormwater needs. We have had some $23.5 million in federal and state funds, either through the CDBG Jumpstart or the iJobs that's been awarded for stormwater CIP projects so far.
Can I just highlight 2 points on here very, very quickly? The last bullet where it said flood risk assessment directly impacts future stormwater needs. That's a nice way of saying that as we try to deal with some of the recent data that we've received from the Corps, there are going to be some local costs that come out of that. And the stormwater enterprise is the part of our budget that would probably absorb most of that cost. So that will undoubtedly impact decisions that you make in regards to future rate increases. The last thing, the very bottom, it is really significant that we've received about $23 million of CDBG Jumpstart dollars and iJob dollars through the state of Iowa. Those have been enormously helpful to us. I wish those programs would continue, but I doubt that they will. But they've been really helpful, and the Council's decision with regard to use of those funds has been very good and has had a very beneficial effect on us. I'll make sure that's
Our final section of review is the sanitary sewer fund. You'll see there the overall budget of about $36 million with an ending fund balance projected at FY12 of about $3.5 million. A large portion of our payments are to the WRA, which is our share for the cost of operations of the Wastewater Reclamation Authority, our share of debt, just a variety of different elements that are included in the WRA allocation. But it is certainly the largest portion of our cost in our sanitary sewer fund. There is going to be some rate increase pressure coming down the road in the next year or two. Certainly, probably in looking at FY13, we've had due to weather and the economy, our revenue stream, our number of gallons billed, which is through the waterworks, is down from a high of 6.4 billion gallons in FY08. It was at 5.9 billion in FY10. We do have, and we've talked about the long-term control plan. There's a three-pronged funding of that. The WRA has some significant funding in their capital program. Of course, the City of Des Moines is a contributor to the WRA, so that flows back into our sewer fund, sanitary sewer fund. The sanitary sewer fund itself is involved in some improvements, significant improvements related to the long-term control plan, as well as our stormwater fund. The budget is about $8.4 million for the CIP and averages about $9 million over the next 5 years. And of course, there is the private property protection program that was implemented. There's been 1,304 applications. You see there just about $1,250,000 in cost. The program is scheduled, I believe, to end in August of 2011. I'm sure between now and then, the Public Works Director will probably want to have a discussion about whether that program needs to be extended or not. Again, aggressive efforts to secure federal and state funds, $9.4 million here in CDBG Jumpstart, $1.3 million in iJobs, for a total of $10.7 million. And as I mentioned previously, we will be looking at a bond sale this spring to continue the capital improvements program as recommended, and we will look for opportunities for any savings and refinancing of debt. Just as a reminder to you, when we've pursued refinancing of debt, our policy has been not to extend the term of existing debt. So we're not achieving savings in a given year because we've taken some $10 million, let's say, of debt that was due to be paid off in 10 years and just expanded it to 20 years. We continue to have the same maturity date under the refinancing scenario, so the savings are real savings that are happening over the same period of time as any current outstanding debt. Our final slide is just to show you the impact of lower water consumption. When you have wetter summers, people are not using as much water and the consumption is down. This is our actual revenue is the green line projected out to 2011, and you can see the as that relates to anticipated revenue with the last rate increase and the impact of having some wetter summers, and obviously with the economy also down. There was a very small amount of just outright customer growth that was anticipated in the blue line. I think it may have been as low as 0.1% anticipated increase in that regard. So our water consumption, as water consumption is lower, our sanitary sewer revenue stream is lower as well. I think that's the last slide for the presentation, and I'll pass it back to City Manager.
Alan, you might just summarize for everybody that our schedule, the hearing on the budget is next Monday?
Yes, on the 14th you set the date of hearing for the 28th of February. That will be a week from tonight. The budget was published in the newspaper, again, with the council policy and direction moving forward of no change in tax rate. So that was published at 16:58. And again, the hearing is scheduled for the 28th. Certification date is for the state is required is March 15th.
And the documents are all out?
Yes, the capital budget was sent to you a week or so ago, and you have before you the operating budget portion as well.
And so if you have any issues, questions, comments, things that you want to address for the hearing, why just let us know, and we'll be happy to research that and get back to you and provide whatever you need to have. So you're coming up a week from today would be your action date on the budget. There is if you decide to continue the hearing, there is time within that schedule to allow you to do that. You could continue it to your next meeting in March. First meeting in March is the
14th.
14.
Okay,
Same as February.
so that would give us a chance to meet the March 15 deadline, but not by very much. So again, if you do have any questions about it, why give us a holler.
Just one last comment. You've seen Kurt Ruckel up here, I think, in the past doing capital budget, answering questions. Dan Ritter, behind me here, is the Research and Budget Officer and leads the Research and Budget Office in all of the work, operating and capital. He's the one that does all of the legwork, does the preparation of the PowerPoint presentations that you see, And they do a great job working with departments, and it really is a team effort involving all of the departments and the Research and Budget Office.
Ellen, thank you. Ask at this time unless there are any comments by any of the council members, any questions? Seeing none, any comments from the public? All right, with that, it's 8:25 and we'll sit adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.